A judge publicly humiliated a royal guard during a routine court hearing, only to find himself in handcuffs when his behavior crossed the line. Or the silent serviceman's unexpected response left the entire courtroom stunned. Here's what happened. Now, before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow at this very same time, we're dropping another powerful royal guard story that you won't want to miss. The morning sun glinted off the polished brass buttons of Lieutenant Nicholas Blackwood's scarlet tunic as he ascended the stone steps of Westminster Crown Court. Passers-by slowed their hurried London pace, some pausing to stare at the unexpected sight of a Queen's Guard in full ceremonial dress outside his usual post. A small child tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed, the excitement in his eyes capturing the enduring mystique that surrounded the historic regiment. Blackwood was accustomed to the attention. 8 years with the Queen's Guard had taught him to exist comfortably under the public gaze, to transform from man to living symbol with the donning of the uniform. At 32, Blackwood cut an imposing figure even by Royal Guard standards. 6'2", with shoulders squared by 8 years of military discipline. His bare skin cap added another foot to his already considerable height, making him impossible to miss among the barristers and solicitors in their traditional black robes. Blackwood had not planned to visit the courthouse today. His appearance as a witness in a burglary case had been scheduled for next week, but an urgent call from the Crown Prosecutor's office had requested his presence immediately. The case involved a break-in he had witnessed while off duty, a simple matter of being in the right place at the right time. Having provided his statement months ago, he expected to confirm his account briefly and return to his scheduled duties at Buckingham Palace. "Quite the entrance you're making," remarked a court clerk as Blackwood presented his identification at the security checkpoint. "We don't see many of the Queen's finest in these halls. Duty called twice today, it seems," Blackwood replied with a slight smile that quickly returned to his practiced neutral expression. Years of standing motionless before crowds of tourists had given him a mastery of his features that few civilian observers could comprehend. The security officer, a former military man himself, judging by his bearing, gave Blackwood a respectful nod as he passed through the metal detector. "Served with the Royal Marines myself," the man said quietly. "Always good to see one of ours maintaining standards." Blackwood acknowledged the comment with a slight nod. His uniform had been prepared with the same meticulous attention he gave it every day. Scarlet tunic brushed to perfection, brass buttons polished to a mirror shine, white belt gleaming. Though some might consider it excessive for a brief court appearance, Blackwood knew no other way to present himself when representing the regiment. A young assistant carrying a stack of legal files nearly collided with him as he turned a corner. She stopped short, eyes widening at the unexpected sight of his ceremonial uniform. "I'm so sorry," she stammered. "Are you here for the Morrison case? It's about to begin in courtroom 7. "Yes, thank you," Blackwood confirmed. He checked his watch, an understated timepiece that had been his grandfather's, a man who had served in the same regiment during the Second World War. He had 15 minutes to locate the courtroom and take his position. Plenty of time for a man who measured his life in seconds of precision. Courtroom 7 boasted the austere grandeur of British judicial tradition. Dark oak paneling absorbed the sound of hushed conversations, while portraits of stern-faced former judges gazed down from above. As Lieutenant Blackwood entered, conversations momentarily faltered, heads turning to assess the unexpected splash of ceremonial scarlet among the somber legal attire. He located an empty seat in the back row of the public gallery, positioning himself with military precision, back straight, feet at the proper angle, hands resting lightly on his knees. Despite the civilian setting, his bearing remained every inch that of a Queen's Guard. Several people nearby shifted slightly, unconsciously creating more space for him, as if his uniform demanded a particular difference. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Victor Harrington," called the clerk as a side door opened. Judge Harrington emerged with the confident stride of a man accustomed to commanding a room. At 58, he carried himself with the practiced authority of his 25 years on the bench. His reputation preceded him, brilliant but temperamental, with a particularly caustic attitude toward those he perceived as wasting the court's time. His thin lips rarely smiled, and his eyes, behind expensive wire-rimmed glasses, held the perpetual calculation of a man assessing weaknesses. The son of a factory foreman, who had fought his way through law school, Harrington had developed a complex relationship with authority and hierarchy. His ascent to the bench had been marked by both academic brilliance and a relentless ambition that occasionally manifested as cruelty toward those he deemed intellectually inferior. Colleagues tolerated his abrasive personality because of his undeniable legal mind, but few sought his company outside the courthouse. His marriage had ended a decade earlier, his wife citing emotional remoteness in divorce proceedings that Harrington had approached with the same clinical detachment he brought to his cases. Now the courtroom was both his domain and his refuge, the one place where his word was quite literally law. As the gallery returned to their seats, Harrington's gaze swept the courtroom with practiced efficiency. His eyes paused imperceptibly when they reached Blackwood, a momentary falter in his rhythm before he took his seat at the bench. The Morrison case began routinely enough, a straightforward burglary, with the prosecutor laying out the charges in measured tones. 3 witnesses would testify to the defendant's presence near the scene. Lieutenant Blackwood would be the 4th, his testimony expected to be brief and conclusive. Yet as the proceedings continued, Blackwood noticed Harrington's attention repeatedly drifting toward him. Between examining documents and addressing counsel, the judge's eyes returned to the back row with increasing frequency. His questions to the first witness seemed distracted, his usual incisive interrogation lacking its characteristic precision. "Your Honor," the defense barrister ventured during one particularly long silence. "Shall I continue with my line of questioning?" Harrington's focus snapped back to the case at hand, but not before casting another glance at the scarlet-uniformed figure, whose very presence seemed to unsettle his courtroom's carefully maintained hierarchy. Halfway through the second witness's testimony, Judge Harrington abruptly rapped his gavel, silencing the prosecutor mid-question. "Before we continue," Harrington announced, his voice carrying the practiced projection of decades on the bench, "I feel compelled to address a matter of courtroom decorum." His gaze fixed directly on Lieutenant Blackwood. "You there in the costume, would you care to explain your choice of attire in my courtroom?" A stunned silence fell. The prosecutor turned, clearly confused by this unexpected interruption of his case. Blackwood rose to his feet with military precision. "Lieutenant Nicholas Blackwood, Your Honor, Queen's Guard, 3rd Battalion. I am on active duty and scheduled to report to my post following these proceedings." "I see," Harrington replied, his tone suggesting he saw something entirely different. "And you felt it appropriate to appear in full ceremonial dress rather than civilian attire. This is a court of law, Lieutenant, not a tourist attraction. With respect, Your Honor, regulations require service members to appear in uniform when representing the regiment in an official capacity. Are you suggesting that a minor burglary case constitutes official regimental business?" "No, Your Honor, however, as I am scheduled for ceremonial duty immediately following." Yes, Harrington interrupted with a dismissive wave, standing perfectly still while Japanese tourists take photographs. "Hardly the pressing military matter you make it sound." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, if we might return to the witness testimony." "In a moment," Harrington countered, his attention still fixed on Blackwood. "I find this display distracting to the serious business of justice. The theatrical bear-kinned hat in particular seems designed to draw attention rather than show respect for these proceedings." Blackwood remained at perfect attention, his expression betraying nothing of his thoughts. "Your Honor, the bear-skin cap is part of the ceremonial uniform established by royal decree in 1815.
I would be out of uniform without it. Ceremonial, Harrington repeated, infusing the word with disdain, an apt description for a role that exists primarily for pageantry rather than substance. Wouldn't you agree? The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, I must object to this line of objection noted and overruled, Harrington snapped.
This is my courtroom, and matters of decorum fall squarely within my authority. He returned his attention to Blackwood, who had remained perfectly composed throughout the exchange. Tell me, Lieutenant, does your training include anything beyond marching in straight lines and standing motionless, or is that the full extent of your capabilities? The insult hung in the air, shocking in its nakedness. Two elderly men in the gallery exchanged glances, their lapel pins identifying them as veterans of earlier conflicts. My training includes extensive tactical and strategic education, sir, Blackwood responded evenly, as well as legal familiarization with the Military Justice Act and civilian military jurisdictional boundaries. Something in the precise delivery of this response seemed to further aggravate Harrington. Very impressive, he remarked, sarcasm dripping from each syllable. Perhaps you'd care to remove the ridiculous hat while in my courtroom. Or does military discipline not extend to basic courtroom respect? The King's regulations stipulate that headgear is removed indoors, except when under arms or on ceremonial duty. Sir, I am currently both. Judge Harrington's jaw tightened visibly, his composure slipping further with each perfectly measured response from the lieutenant. He leaned forward, fingers steepled on the bench before him. Let me be perfectly clear, Lieutenant. In this courtroom, my authority supersedes your military regulations. I find your presence in that theatrical uniform disruptive, and your responses bordering on insolent. The prosecutor rose again. Your Honor, Lieutenant Blackwood is here as a witness for the Crown. His testimony is vital to. Are you attempting to instruct me on how to conduct proceedings in my own courtroom? Mr. Palmer, Harrington snapped, his voice sharp enough to make the prosecutor physically recoil. Sit down. Turning back to Blackwood, Harrington's expression had hardened into something approaching contempt. Tell me, Lieutenant, do you find it difficult to think for yourself after years of blindly following orders, or were you selected for guard duty precisely because of that particular quality? A ripple of shocked whispers spread through the gallery. One of the elderly veterans in the third row half rose from his seat before his companion placed a restraining hand on his arm. Even the defendant looked uncomfortable with the judge's behavior. Your Honor, Blackwood replied, his voice remaining steady. British military service emphasizes both discipline and independent critical thinking. The Queen's Guard is selected from soldiers with exemplary service records, many with combat experience. We follow lawful orders while maintaining our capacity for independent judgment. Harrington laughed, a short, dismissive sound entirely devoid of humor. How wonderfully rehearsed. Did they provide that little speech along with the costume? He gestured contemptuously toward Blackwood's medal ribbons and these colorful decorations, participation awards for standing still. The court recorder's fingers faltered momentarily over her stenotype machine, clearly uncomfortable documenting the judge's increasingly inappropriate remarks. The Distinguished Service Cross was awarded for actions during the evacuation of civilians under fire in Helmand Province. Your Honor, Blackwood stated simply. The ribbon beside it represents the Queen's Gallantry Medal for disarming an explosive device that threatened a school. Though his words were factual and devoid of embellishment, they carried the weight of unspoken experiences. What Blackwood didn't mention was the searing Afghan heat as he'd carried 2 injured children through open terrain. The distinctive crack of sniper fire sending dust spouts around his boots with each step. Nor did he speak of the 37 agonizing minutes he'd spent with the improvised explosive device. His hands steady, despite knowing that the slightest tremor would mean death for himself and the 200 school children in the building. Those memories lived in the nightmares that occasionally still woke him.
Private burdens that had forged the disciplined man who now stood in this courtroom being mocked for his costume. One of the veterans nodded in grim satisfaction at this revelation. The other whispered something that made several nearby spectators turn in surprise. Harrington's face flushed deeper. "Your combat fairy tales don't impress me, Lieutenant. Men who need to dress up in costumes and parade around for tourists clearly missed something vital in their development." Article 68 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice recognizes that ceremonial duties maintain public trust. "Your Honor," Lieutenant Nicholas Blackwood replied calmly. "The European Court of Human Rights has said the same about ceremonial roles." Judge Harrington surged to his feet. "Are you lecturing me on the law, toy soldier? I find your manner contemptuous. You are in contempt immediately." Blackwood stayed at attention. "With respect, Your Honor, contempt requires willful disrespect or obstruction. I've been neither." Harrington's face darkened. "There is your contempt, questioning my authority." The courtroom held its breath as the judge's temper snapped. He grabbed his gavel and hurled it at Blackwood. In one smooth motion, the guardsman caught it midair, the wood stopping in his white-gloved hand. Silence crashed over courtroom 7. "That," Blackwood said evenly, "is assault on a serving member of the armed forces and judicial misconduct while presiding." He set the gavel down and removed his bearskin cap. "Before joining the Queen's Guard, I served as a barrister with the Judge Advocate General's Corps. Oxford Law, first-class honors, military law. I maintain my credentials. What we have witnessed is a criminal offense in open court." Veterans in the gallery rose to confirm what they'd seen. The court recorder noted every word. Security officers glanced at one another, then moved. The chief magistrate arrived, read the transcript, and quietly ordered Harrington removed from the bench pending investigation. An hour later, Blackwood stood outside Buckingham Palace, motionless in scarlet and bearskin as tourists clicked their cameras, unaware of the morning's upheaval. Behind the uniform Harrington mocked stood a man of discipline and moral courage, qualities that exposed the judge's abuse of power. If this story made you rethink judging by appearances, like the video, subscribe, and share your experiences with authority in the comments.